hit this on Twitter one more time?
Well, that would work. Hey, guys, we are live. Thanks for tuning into the BAMF podcast. And indulge me just a moment while I play our contractually obligated intro music. Sorry about that. I lost a bet. I have to play that every time now. So, welcome back to this panel discussion we have with Ron Marz, currently working for Marvel Comics, working with artist Ron Lim, returning to the Silver Surfer with a limited miniseries coming out in January. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Marz. Always a pleasure.
Mr. Marz is my dad. I'm just Ron.
Sorry, I know you always say that. So, thanks for coming, Ron. It's always a pleasure. You add a little bit of respectability to our little dog and pony show here. So, I appreciate it.
If there's one thing I'm familiar with, it's dogs and ponies because we have both of those. So,
oh, nice. Good. I have a Great Dane who's kind of like a combination of those two things. So, here's a cover, Silver Surfer Rebirth. Now, this is set back in the continuity of the 90s, right?
It's set during the run that Ron and I had on the book in the 90s. I'm not the biggest continuity hound. I kind of feel like they're all made up stories, so just figure out where they fit. Whatever's convenient for the reader. So when we initially discussed this, there was a question of whether we were going to, this goes between, issue 84 and issue 85 of the run, or be that specific about it. And I just said, don't worry about it. It's in there somewhere. It's a self-contained story. You don't really need to know anything. I was going to say you don't need to know anything going in other than maybe who Silver Surfer is. But honestly, I don't even think you need to know that because he gets kind of introduced in the first issue. You could have never read a comic before in your life, and this would be a damn fine first one.
David Thomas joined us in the comments saying, thought they were trying to Marvel for real. That is kind of teased on the cover, right?
It's not even kind of teased. He's right there. He's right in your face.
Well, could you give us kind of the brief elevator pitch? What's happening in this series?
The really brief elevator pitch is Ron Lim and I are going back to do Silver Surfer. That's the real short one. The story pitch is Surfer winds up having to team up with Thanos because I guess this is in the solicit, so this isn't too much of a spoiler. The Surfer is recruited by Thanos because someone has stolen the reality gem from Thanos and is doing things with it. So the intention is to get them to stop doing things with it. And then, of course, becomes if they could actually do that, the question becomes, well, who winds up with the reality gem? You're not going to trust Thanos with it, are you? So it's very much in the wheelhouse of the kind of stuff that Ron and I did for, I guess 4 or 5 years on the book.
Okay. Well, that's cool. So is this kind of a 48 hours sort of buddy cop team up?
Yeah, I think they're both probably a better person than Nick Nolte's character. So yeah, it is strange bedfellows, certainly. They're not friends. There may be allies, but that will sort of unfolds through the 5 issues that they don't really get along.
So you have done a ton of stuff since that classic Silver Surfer run. What was it like to go back and pick up the Silver Surfer and that era and writing in that style and playing with those toys narratively again?
Honestly, it was like we hadn't missed a beat. It was just like going back home again. And particularly working with Ron. Obviously he was the first artist I ever worked with, period, in comics. So learning to write comics from Jim Starlin and learning how your comics look on the page from Ron Lim, it's pretty good education for me. So going back to that and just sort of sliding right back into that mindset was pretty easy. It's actually easier than I thought it would be. I guess I haven't written Surfer in well, not quite 30 years, but 25 years.
Yeah.
And going back to the character and going back to the sort of cosmic end of the Marvel universe was just like, you didn't really have to think about it too much. It was right there.
Have you been keeping track of what's gone on with Surfer since then, or is that not part of your process?
I generally don't keep track of stuff after I leave it. More from the point of view that I just don't have time to keep track of stuff.
Yeah.
That's the honest truth of being a professional writer in comics, is you don't have time to read a lot of comics, frankly. There's enough work, and then there's enough sort of necessary stepping away from work to go do something else, go to the gym or go to the golf course or play softball, whatever your unplugged thing is. That I don't read anywhere near the amount of comics I would like to, or the amount of comics that are stacked up on the floor of my office here. But that's just the necessary process of it, is you don't read as much as you want to. So, I mean, I sort of pay attention when the Surfer shows up somewhere. I paid attention to the Dan Slott stuff. I paid attention to I should say Dan Slott and Mike Allred stuff. I paid attention to the Donny Cates run a bit, but I don't read much of anything voraciously, just from the sheer standpoint of getting to the store every week is not a possibility, particularly in our current pandemic era. And having the time to read it, it really is part of your job. It's part of your job is to read comics, which ain't bad. But there's always the pull of, well, should I really be reading this, or should I be writing something? Should I be pecking away at the keyboard to get something done, or should I be writing the book? And honestly, most of the time, pecking away at the keyboard wins that argument.
Yeah, I see Michael's son nodding in agreement. I know as a writing teacher, that probably comes up a lot in class.
Yeah. One of the questions I had sort of written down was what's some media that you turn to when you're in sort of like a craft bind to help you sort of navigate your way out of it. But that means like going to stepping away from the keyboard to read something, which is
single malt scotch.
Single malt scotch. There you go.
It's the go-to. There's no magic trick to any of this stuff. It's it's work, and it's more perspiration than inspiration. I find when I need to, I step away. I go for a drive, go hit golf balls, go take a shower. I mean, the shower is the writer's best friend. There's no other distractions there. There's nothing except your mind wandering. In terms of media, like I love going to see movies, which obviously we haven't done a whole lot of lately. Starting to get back to it now, although I guess we might have to put the brakes on that soon. We'll see. So I like the process of going to a big darkened room somewhere and unplugging. Not having the temptation to be looking at your phone or any of the stuff that you do when you're at home. So that's what I enjoy more than anything, is actually going to the theater and having the movie theater experience, because it's removes you from your surroundings. Like I said, there's no magic trick to it. Sometimes the thing that works this week is not the thing that works next week. I do try to consume what I can when I can, because I think you always need grist for the mill, whether it's reading comics, reading prose, reading magazine articles, or watching TV or film. You do need to have an intake, and even if your intake is just being in the line in the grocery store and overhearing the conversation next to you. I mean, that's all inspiration. Although obviously we get the groceries delivered now, so you don't have that outlet.
Yeah, you kind of waxing nostalgic with the movie theaters. I had to stop and think when the last time it was that I went to a place like that, and it's been at least 2 years. So I've been looking forward to Spider-Man. I'm like, oh shoot, I guess I'm going to have to wait on that.
No, around here, I live in upstate New York near Albany, so things are pretty good here. Seem to be trending upward a little bit, which I'm not crazy about. My gym just decided that we need to be wearing masks again, so that's a pretty good indication of where things are headed. But I've been to see 5 or 6 movies in the last couple of months. Generally, at times when there's not a lot of I'm not going on opening night to see to see the new Bond movie. Although I did go on opening night to see Dune because I couldn't not. So generally, the last few months I've been able to get out and have that experience, and hopefully around between Christmas and New Year, get to see some of the stuff that's just come out now. Spider-Man among them.
Since it came up, I'm pretty sure everyone on this call has an opinion on Dune. What'd you think of the movie? Okay.
Deafening silence.
We don't have to get into that then. It's a positive podcast. We're doing promotion, so that's cool.
I liked it. I thoroughly liked it, actually. And I was very glad that I saw it on the biggest screen I could find. I know some people had issues with the adaptation, but I'm a big fan of the filmmaker in the first place. I would go watch Denny, show 2 hours of scenes of grass waving in a meadow. It's that painterly and that good for me. So I have not yet watched it at home because I want to have that experience as well to compare to because the scale of the movie blew me away. The scale of the movie I thought was perfect. So does that scale translate to your 65-inch screen in the house? I don't know. Hopefully we'll find out between Christmas and New Year for that too.
I mean, it was a beautifully shot movie. It was a beautifully acted movie. None of the costume design, the set design, it had tons of interesting stuff. None of that is a place where I would knock it, and I certainly didn't regret my time spent watching it.
Yeah, I agreed. I thought it was. I was thoroughly entertained while I was watching it. The only comparison I would make to previous versions is I think they did a little more character work with the 1980s version, where you understood character motivations a little more.
For me, it hit a whole bunch of buttons that I like. So a lot of the stuff talking about just a lot of the issues that were sort of coming up in the film were issues that I love to talk about. And it was absolutely a gorgeous film. It was just I was glad I had my mask on while I was watching it because my jaw was open for most of it. When it wasn't also being like, it was like putting popcorn underneath, and but yeah, I had a great time.
Yeah, I was a big fan, but I'm an old geek. I read the book in 6th grade and saw the movie in the theater the first time. So yeah. So Ron, I got to ask this question, and I feel bad asking it because I'm sure you get it like every convention when you're promoting a new book. People say, "Well, how is this, especially a cosmic character? How is this compared to writing Kyle Rayner?" And of course, you've actually done books where these two characters met each other. So I guess it's not that.
Kind of opposite end of the spectrum.
Really?
For
Okay.
me, yeah, I don't find them to be similar characters at all, because Kyle is very much patterned after kind of the the everyman archetype. Kyle is much more Spider-Man than he is Silver Surfer or Superman or any of the sort of cosmic characters that we're more familiar with. Kyle was very much you if you got the ring. That was the mindset was, what would just an average guy, a guy who's not a fearless test pilot and kind of a hero already, what would happen if that guy got the ring? So that was the idea behind Kyle. And then the Surfer, I think, is very much one step outside of humanity. He is the alien with a capital A. He's to me, he's much more Spock than Kirk, right? So I think the Surfer serves really well as a mirror for humanity, as a way to look at humanity. And so I think sometimes the Surfer can be a better supporting character or guest star than a starring character. And I think in the series that we're doing now, we've sort of got both of those aspects because he's sort of teamed up with Thanos. He plays really well off of other characters who contrast to him. I've written the Surfer with the Thing a few times, and I love that dichotomy. The Thing is, despite the way he looks, Ben Grimm is one of the most human characters in comics, and the Surfer is that sort of removed alien cool character. Not cool in the Fonzie sense, cool in the temperature sense. So yeah, I mean, for me, Kyle and Surfer are really different ends of the spectrum. It's one of the reasons I enjoyed writing the crossover so much, is because they were very different characters.
Yeah, this is actually the cover for issue 2 of the series. I just found that trolling around on Google. So that is some nice looking Kirby Crackle there in that Ron Lim art.
No, Ron Lim is just an amazing artist. I love his work.
If you're not going to do the Surfer and you're not going to do Kirby Crackle, don't bother showing up, because those two words showed up a lot in the script. I got to tell you.
Nice.
Speaking of Ron Lim, question directed to Ron Marz. Have you ever thought about portraying a scene just to torture your artist?
Oh, that's my job.
I want to see an armada of starships, and there has to be at least 100 of them on the page.
You pick your spots.
Yeah,
you can ask for that on the 2-3 spread, right? You can ask for that on the spread that goes on pages 2 and 3. You better not ask for the same thing on 4 and 5.
Yes.
So that is one of your jobs as a comic writer, is to come up with cool shit for your artist to draw. That's one of the boxes you got to check to do this job. Because if it's a cool thing to draw, the artist is excited about it, artist does a great job, the audience gets excited about it, everybody wins. But you can't do that on every page. You can't. You can't pull out the stops on every page, otherwise the book takes 3 years to draw. I mean, I did a Surfer graphic novel with Claudio Castellini back in the 90s that was 48 pages that literally took him 3 years to draw, because every page was that. And not because that's what I asked for in the script, but that's the way he approached it. Just like the most amazing art job ever. But everything was like, every detail on every panel was there. It's approaching the story that way is not a conducive model for American monthly comics.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, because you did, again, another Wayback Machine, the Batman Aliens comic with Bernie Wrightson, who is traditionally the super high detail artist. And it's like, I was like, how long did that take?
Well, I know very well how long that one took because Bernie was living 1.5 miles down the road from me at that point.
That must have been fun.
So I could go visit the pages as they were being drawn, and I did. But even then, the part of that process is, and that whole thing came about because Bernie and I were just spitballing, driving in the car somewhere, and he said, "What about Batman Aliens? That would be kind of cool to do." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be cool." And so he said, "Well, I'll call Dark Horse and see if they'd be interested." And neither one of us really thinking that that was going to happen because that was ridiculous. Who would approve that? And so they did. And then we're like, "Oh shit, we better come up with a story now." So part of the process of coming up with the story was Bernie and I sitting down in his studio and me going, "Well, what do you want to draw and what do you not want to draw?" And what do you not want to draw turned out to be buildings and cars. I don't, there's not a straight edge in that whole damn series. And that was by request. So that's why it ended up set in the jungle in the Yucatan Peninsula, in an underground Mayan rune complex, because Bernie could just make all that stuff up. There's the Mayans didn't have any cars. So
Yep,
there was no need to reference those.
Let's say I hate to do another tangent, but I still think this is maybe one of the best Green Lantern comics ever.
Thanks, me too.
Yeah.
I'm not unbiased though. So
No, but I mean, Green Lantern versus Aliens plays to the theme of the characters, I think, a little more natural. I mean, Batman versus Aliens was cool. Don't get me wrong. I read it. I loved it. But the theme of Batman is not necessarily facing aliens threats from other worlds, right? That's something that he gets into, but it's not necessarily core to his character. Whereas it is really kind of core to the Green Lanterns to be dealing with alien space threats, the unknown, things that are potentially planetary existential problems.
it seemed like a natural fit, and honestly, it was, once Batman Aliens came out and was a success. Nothing breeds success like success. So, honestly, nothing breeds sequels like success.
Yeah.
So, Superman,
We
by
don't talk about that.
Jurgens
Okay.
and Kevin Nolan, got running, which was great. I still look back at that book. I think it's terrific. So the next, the next one that wasn't Batman or Superman was very, seemed like Green Lantern was the obvious one. And we had talked to Dark Horse about it, because it was Dark Horse's turn to editorially run the project. Because when DC and Dark Horse would do a deal, they would, one for me, one for you, in terms of who was going to publish it, who was going to solicit it, editorially maintain it, and all that. And we talked to him about Green Lantern Aliens, and didn't hear anything back for a month, and just thought, well, I guess that's the end of that. We're not doing that. And then I got a call from the editor, who said, "Hey, when is that script coming in?" And I said, "What script?" And he said, "Green Lantern Aliens. It's on the schedule. What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm not writing Green Lantern Aliens because nobody told me to." So the miscommunication between, Dark Horse thought DC had told me, DC thought Dark Horse had told me, and then I was working away. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I need to come up with a story now. So in short order, we had to get it going, because Rick Leonardi's schedule opened up. He was ready to draw, so we had to hit the ground running on that one.
When you're doing crossover stuff, do you find the creative process in any way more difficult than when you're only, because not only is that characters that aren't in the same, you know, continuity normally, but they're also from different mediums originally. They have very different purposes. And do you find that any different than just saying this is going to be a DC book, or I'm going to work on, I mean, you worked on Pathfinder Goblins, you mentioned, you've done Jen Carter, so you've done a lot of different stuff. But when you're blending things from different origins, is that a different process for you?
Nah, it's all just made up shit.
It's a perfectly reasonable answer.
They're all just imaginary stories. The perception is that stuff that's, you know, like Star Wars or Star Trek or something like that that's from a different medium is more difficult. But honestly, I've never found it to be that way. It's really all about the people that you're dealing with. When I was working on the Star Wars franchise for, you know, a number of years for Dark Horse, once I got past the, you know, sort of the bar where the approval people at Lucasfilm were like, oh, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. We don't have to, you know, we don't have to fine tooth comb him. It was just the same as anything else. And frankly, it was, I found it to be almost easier than writing in the Marvel and DC universes because everything made sense. Like the timelines at that point made sense. Because it was, you know, it was a fairly cohesive universe with a series of events that actually, you know, that actually took place, that makes sense. And, you know, it's not like, you know, Luke Skywalker isn't 30 years old for 60 years like Bruce and Clark Kent, right? So, you know, Luke Skywalker didn't meet, you know, Roosevelt and Clinton, you know, and seemingly be the same person. So, so in that respect, it was easier because you just, you know, you looked at the whole timeline and you found where you could, you know, fit your stories in. In terms of the crossovers, I actually think they're easier in some ways because you're telling a story that's never been told before. You're doing this. Green Lantern Aliens is a story that's never been told before. So you're not dealing with, you know, this is the first time they've met. It's not the 118th time the Fantastic Four meets Dr. Doom.
Right.
To me, that's a little bit more difficult because you're trying to polish up something that's been done a bunch of times before. And how do you find something new and different and exciting to do with it?
Yeah. And if Batman's facing the Joker, if we've all seen that story, how do you make it something new and interesting?
Right. I mean, and that's the job, obviously. And that's why we still publish those stories. You know, some of them successful and some of them less successful. But doing something that's never been done before, that story is sitting there waiting for you.
Yeah, I did find when I was working on Star Wars for the role-playing games, the approval process was really the one thing that felt very different compared to writing a role-playing game from scratch. Because there's the Lucasfilm approvals, and then there's still all the normal editorial process of the company wanting to make sure that you're doing the stuff they want for the game. So you basically have two sets of people giving you feedback. But again, once you're at a point where people start to recognize your name and you have done several of these, it does seem to streamline a bit.
Yeah, I think you make your own luck in a lot of that. You know, you don't go to Lucasfilm and say, well, in this one, you know, we're gonna kill Darth Vader for good.
Right.
And, you know, you learn to play well with other people's toys. That's the nature of working in a shared universe, whatever the universe is.
Yeah, there's an element of trust and knowing what is and isn't appropriate, right? That there could be perfectly logical stories that just don't fit with the kinds of stories that IP owner has any interest in telling.
And honestly, that's one of the reasons you get hired to do it.
Yeah,
like if you come in and you don't know the material, or the finished product shows you don't know the material, because I've taken on gigs that, like, Sure, I'll do that. And then then you got to go do the research and
there's a research phase, right?
Yeah. But if you prove you don't know what you're doing and you didn't educate yourself well enough to portray that story properly, well, you're probably not going to come back and do it again.
I when I was first starting on Star Wars, pretty much we had the Star Wars Encyclopedia and maybe a couple of the Del Rey essential books, and at first that was it, and all the West End game stuff, of course. Nowadays, whenever I'm being asked to do something like that, I almost always have the IP people say, and by the way, this online resource is pretty good, so you can use that for starting like Wikipedia is a great place for starting your research, even if you want to necessarily double check resources, but it can give you a good overview.
Yeah,
have you found?
Oh yeah, I mean it's a whole different ballgame. Well, reference period is a whole different ball. When I started writing comics as a kid, and in 1990, so like none of this existed. I either sent my scripts into Marvel and DC in a FedEx envelope, or I faxed them. That was fun. That's how Stone Age it was when I started doing it. And all the artists I knew had huge morgue files of reference of need a gun, so yep, I ripped a picture of a gun out of a magazine and now I have to draw it. Artists that I hung out with just had huge libraries of books of reference and filing cabinets full of tear sheets. Nobody has that anymore because anything you need is at the tip of your fingers.
Yep.
More than likely, the writer has already dropped that image into the script for you.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a whole different process. Although when I got sort of wedded to the Star Wars universe for a while, I convinced myself that it was totally cool to go to the bookstore and buy like $500 worth of Star Wars reference material that I still have, of course. So it was stuff that I wanted, but also a tax write-off.
It totally is. Yeah, I also had a big stack of West End game stuff and essential guides and there was other than the encyclopedia, there were some other things too, and some of that, like some of the West End game material, of course, was out of print, and so you sort of had to hunt around for collectors to try and find some of that material.
Yeah, you guys can't see, but behind me there's a kiddie pool that's filled with Stoli vodka, and that's tax write-off for me as well. When I'm not feeling inspired enough, I mix Jello in there sometimes just for fun. But
for wrestling purposes,
that's where the Great Dane comes in. It's creative juices flowing.
I find the vodka really retards the gelling process. You got to put a lot more gelatin in when you're wanting to do vodka.
That's what I learned at Purdue University. I'm right there with you. Dave Thomas has taken a break from working at Wendy's. I'm just kidding, Dave. It's old guys will get that joke. He's saying, what do you guys think of continuity with fellow writers? Like if you're working on a team book and Thor's written this way in this book, he's written another way over in his single title or his solo title. Is that something you guys, it seems like more and more there's not a lot of coordination going on. I don't know if that's something people in the industry really are thinking about, or maybe not so much. Or
man, that's a whole hour discussion all by itself.
I personally blame the editors. I never blame the writers. I always blame the editors.
Well, but I mean, exactly what Ron was saying earlier, right? There's also the fact that if you're talking about how is Thor written, do we mean in all the comics coming out right now, or all in the comics coming out since the 1960s? Because he's theoretically the same person.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, I think if everything comes out and reads the same, that's like going to Ben and Jerry's and all they've got in the cabinet is vanilla. Now some people like that. Some people just want vanilla, and anything else they're not interested in. But I think for a wider audience, and we have a wider audience now than we've had probably ever in terms of the different demographics that read comics in general. Different interpretations of the characters are going to appeal to different people. And if you don't like this one, there's probably one over here you like. And frankly, if we're talking about, Marvel and DC shared universe stuff, there's decades of depictions of those characters. And if you can't find a comic that you like somewhere in that vast trove of material, you probably don't like comics that much.
So you're a busy dude, Ron. How many do you keep track of how many words you write a week or a month?
No. I don't even keep track of how many projects I'm working on per month because that's not an answer I want to know. I just, I say yes to the projects that appeal to me and then figure out a way to get them done.
All right, that works. Well, hey, we are getting towards, I think, the end time. Michelson, you've been a little quiet. I love to hear your voice, sir. You've got that deep, resonant radio voice. You got any follow-up questions, anything else you want to talk about with Ron?
Well, I had a lot of my questions are sort of writing questions. And one of them was that I'd like to send your ways. A writing rule that you've been told you have to follow that you've broken and love to break.
I didn't learn a lot of the hard and fast rules in the first place. So, I mean, to me, the only rule that's important is right. Like you don't, it's a job. Absolutely. And if you want to be a writer, writer's right. Mm-hmm. And to me, the other important thing is finish something. Yes. Like don't have 16 unfinished projects because that means you have 0 projects. Finish a thing, put it out in front of people, and then move on to the next one. Learn the lessons that finishing something and putting it in front of an audience teaches you, and then move on to the next one. Take those lessons with you. I look, comics are a form of alchemy. There's no one right way to do them. There's no one right way to write them, to draw them, any of it. There are by and large rules that you are going to follow, but you adapt them to what works for you, and you adapt that, and you further adapt that to what works for you and the artist that you're working with. It's a partnership. It's like dating to a certain extent. You find the people that you click with, and then you work with those people, and you give to each of those artists. The artist is basically your co-author.
Right.
If I write a script and give it to 3 different artists, that story turns out in 3 different fashions. That might all be, it might all be pizza, but they're all different flavors of pizza. So I feel like the job is to adapt what you do to both the story that you're telling and to the artist that you're working with. And that tends to bring out the best in everybody that's involved. If you said, what one rule do I follow? I don't know that there is one. But I think the biggest rule is try not to leave your artist sitting around without anything to draw. That's the big rule.
Any follow-up questions, Michelson?
I mean, you give me such wonderful answers. Would you mind talking more about what works best for you for like communication between authors and your artists, but also with editors, IP, because I'm gonna go talk to students after this, right? But what are some things that have worked for you that
It's again, it's a different answer for different people. Sure. I started in this business pre-email. Right. So you spend a lot of time on the phone. I spent a lot of time on the phone talking about stuff, kicking ideas around, and then email showed up, and we backed off the phone a bit, and we were emailing each other. And now email seems like a very slow process to everyone. So now we have Twitter and Slack and texting and direct messages on any social platform you care to name. It's whatever. Look, there are artists that I work with that I communicate with on a regular basis, and artists that we communicate back and forth a little bit at the beginning of each issue, and if he or she has a question, they'll pop in and we'll discuss it. And otherwise, it's just some artists want to be in touch and be communicative and collaborative, and some artists just want to tell me what you would like me to draw, and I will do layouts and we'll discuss those, and then I'll go off and draw the issue. It's different strokes for different folks. There's no singular right answer to it. It's just whatever works for those people and whatever works to get the best finished product out of those people.
I mean, all the game collaborations I've done, it's always been a question of, if you've already worked with those people before, like I worked for Jacob a lot, I know how much is too much to give Jacob and how much is not enough. And when I can say something like, hey, I want it to look like this, but not look like this, which I would not want to just say that to a random artist, but I've worked with Jacob enough that he understands that. But I think the ability to communicate well and clearly and figure out when you're communicating and the communication doesn't work well, figuring out really quickly that form of communication has not worked well, those are sort of the important under skills, and then you build the collaboration with each person you're working with.
Yeah, and certainly it's a case by case basis. There are artists that I can work with in shorthand, Rick Leonardi and Bart Sears and Darryl Banks, Ron Lim, people that I've worked with a bunch. I don't need to put every detail down because they know my storytelling sensibilities and I know theirs, and we can kind of work in Morse code sometimes. And artists that I have never worked with before, I will tend to put more detail, more specifics, more reference into a script, and then say, here's the way I see it in my head. That doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Bring your interpretation to this, because this should be a collaborative process. It should not be an assembly line process. And doing monthly comics can turn into an assembly line because the deadline is always nipping at your heels, and so you want to do what you can to not turn it into that sort of by rote thing where everybody's just knocking out widgets. And the other thing that I would say is certainly now you have to be aware of is English your artist's first language? If it is, okay, great. And if it is not, you need to be a little bit more mindful of the language you're using in your script so that there's no misinterpretation, so that the colloquialisms that are part and parcel of how we speak to each other. If I'm working with someone in Argentina or Chile who maybe doesn't have those cultural references, I stand a good chance of confusing the artist because I'm not being careful in how I present what's in my head.
Famously at Paizo, there was a story of having ordered a man-eating tree and getting back a picture of a barbarian with a fork and a knife working on eating a tree because the artist was not a native English speaker. So a man-eating tree to him was a man eating a tree. And that was not on him. Right now, sketches can help with that problem a lot, but you still want to be clear as close to the beginning of the process as you can, especially because it's a treadmill. It's an endless treadmill when you're doing anything monthly.
I had a drinking buddy back in Tucson, Arizona, who was Russian, been in America for like 5 to 7 years, and just you don't realize the weight of all the things, idiomatic speech, all the things you just take for granted, little turns of phrase that make no sense to someone who didn't grow up steeped in English or whatever the language is. So, hey, just to wrap things up, Silver Surfer, Ron Lim, Ron Marz, on newsstands in January. Ask your local comic book stores for it, or I'm sure you can find it on Comixology. And looks like it's going to be great. Ron, really appreciate you coming out and talking to us. It's always a lot of fun.
No problem, guys. It's a pleasure. I think January 19th, first one comes out, and I have read it out. It's in the can. It's off at the printers. And I got to say, turning it in, getting the art back, and then a bit later you get to read out the issue and make some tweaks to it, and I just had a grin from ear to ear when we were going over the book to send it off to press, because it's just it was a lot of fun, and I remember the kid who wrote Silver Surfer 30 years ago, and I think he would enjoy this one too.
Nice. Looking forward to
Very
it.
cool.
Any closing thoughts from anybody before we call it a podcast? All right, I guess that's it. Ron, thanks again. And we will catch everyone next time on the BAMF podcast.